Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. My name is Stephanie Eugene, and I am a member of the Independence Boulevard Seventh-day Adventist Church, where I serve on the COVID-19 task force. I am also a practicing emergency physician here in the city of Chicago. And since December, I have joined the Trusted Messenger campaign, which is through an organization called the Chicago Medical Society, who is attempting to educate trusted leaders in the community so that we can then educate others in the community about the COVID-19 vaccine. So tonight, I do have a presentation prepared, and we'll go through a few slides. There's a lot of information. If you can take away just a few points out of this discussion, then I think it will be well worth your time. Don't get boggled down by the details. I'm trying to simplify things as much as possible and keep things pretty straightforward. But the idea is to educate and clarify any misconceptions that are out there and any myths that are out there about the vaccine. Afterwards, if you have any questions, I will save time to go over any questions that the audience may have. And you may place your questions in the comment box. What tonight is not about is me telling you what to do or imposing my views on you. I want you to make an informed decision. Okay? So, with that said, we are going to get started and we're going to talk about the COVID-19 epidemic and the vaccines. So, the reason that we are still in the thick of this pandemic is that there are only a small number of effective treatments for COVID-19. Even prevention has been mostly limited to hand washing, social distancing, and masking, which have been problematic among the public. With many people, they're showing indifference and sometimes downright animosity towards these recommendations. There is also a very delicate balance between quarantining and city lockdowns that have been in place to protect us. Unfortunately, these measures inevitably have consequences as well, and they result in a struggling economy, increase in depression rates and anxiety, addiction, and even violence. So, after a long 12 months of waiting and sacrificing, struggling, heartbreak, confusion, and a lot of fear, we finally have a vaccine. This vaccine is considered a triumph. However, unfortunately, it has been met with a lot of frustration and disappointment, especially in communities of color where the death rates for the COVID-19 vaccine have been higher. There are people who have limited access to get the vaccine, or there's been transportation issues. You have to get there. And most of the vaccines right now require 2 injections. So not only do you have to coordinate one appointment, but you have to coordinate two. There have been long wait times for obtaining these vaccines. And of course, the vaccine is still not yet available to everyone. So there definitely have been challenges, which the government and the city officials are working on. However, we are finally turning the corner in this pandemic, excuse me. So surveys have been out there and they have been asking the community, why is it that you want to get this vaccine? Because not everyone is sold, right? There are a lot of people that just are not comfortable yet. Surveys have showed that at least 55% of Americans are stating that they want the vaccine or that they have already received the vaccine. But that's not a very high number. We would like for it to increase, and hopefully with time it will. About 22% of people are saying that they are in a wait and see period. They think they're going to get it, but they just need a little bit more information. They want to do some research and feel a little bit more comfortable. And then there's about 7% of people who say they do plan to take the vaccine if it becomes required. And there's been a lot of debate in the media and discussion about whether this vaccine will eventually become required. Some workplaces may choose to make it a requirement. Some schools may choose to do the same. And even with travel, as we've already seen, they're requiring testing, and maybe in the future, there may be a requirement to have vaccination as well. So, some of the reasons that people have cited for getting the vaccine is obviously they want to protect their health. They don't want to get sick. They don't want to be hospitalized. And certainly they don't want to die from the effects of COVID-19 complications. A lot of people are actually citing that it's their family's health that they're worried about. For months, even myself, I did not go and see my mother at the beginning of the pandemic. And eventually I did start to go around and see her, but people have been cautious and they're nervous about seeing family members, and they don't want to have that same anxiety and worry every time they go see their parents or their grandparents. And some of these people are vulnerable and older and have comorbidities, and so they are looking out for their family and they don't want to cause them to get sick. And then there's people who cite that they're just interested in helping society, take one for the team. The more people that get vaccinated, the better our shot at overcoming this pandemic. Others have said that they know someone, a loved one, or a friend who passed away from COVID-19, and they didn't want to see that happen to anyone else. Others are just ready to get back to normalcy. Our lives have completely changed upside down. Nothing looks the same as it once did. And we just want a sense of normalcy again. We know the masks and social distancing will be around for a while, but people are ready to go shopping again and vacation again and go to the movie theater and just enjoy themselves and relax a little bit more. And then, of course, there's people who just say, well, they know several people who they trust, and they want to get the vaccine for those reasons. On the other hand, there are still people who are very worried and reluctant to get the vaccine. And this is not surprising because the history of COVID-19 since the beginning has been marked by politics, misinformation, and even mistrust. And so we have surveyed, I shouldn't say we, but there have been surveys. And this particular survey included participants of color, mostly African American and Latino populations. And they asked, well, what are your concerns about the vaccines? 75% said they were worried about side effects. So that's a huge concern for the American people. Another 33% say they're hesitant to get any vaccine in general. And then there's about 25% who say that they're concerned that you can actually get COVID from the vaccine. And then about 20% of people said that they had concerns about microchips and that the government was using the vaccine as a vector to insert microchips that can then be used for tracking purposes. So those were most of the concerns, but here were some others I thought I'd share because I thought they were interesting too. But people also have concerns about long term effects, and we'll talk about that. There's distrust to them pushing it on the masses, hasn't really been studied on people of color. And what I like to say about that is there is some truth to that. In both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, about 70% of those study participants in the clinical trials were of Caucasian descent, and about 10% or so were African American, and 10% were Latino. In the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, those studies also included about 70% Caucasian, but up to about 20% African Americans and about 15% Latino. So we definitely were underrepresented in the clinical trials, but part of that was probably our hesitance and reluctance to be included, to trust in the process. Other reasons was people felt that it was rushed, and I'll talk about that. I have underlying health conditions. It's not trustworthy. It will change my DNA. It will change my relationship with God, and distrust towards the government due to historical abuse. These are all legitimate concerns, and I'll try to touch on as many of them as I can. But I will say that this is just a minority of people. Luckily, people who have cited that they absolutely refuse to get the vaccine and have no intention of getting it is only at about 5%. So let's talk a little bit about vaccine safety. Um, Vaccines have been used in the US now for over 2 centuries. And due to the effectiveness of these vaccines, we have been able to eradicate some serious public health illnesses that often plagued the country many years ago, such as smallpox and polio and measles. We rarely see these infections anymore due to the vaccines that we've been using for a long time. So we've been using these for a very long time to prevent infectious illnesses. Safety has long been established because strict protocols are in place, very stringent protocols to make sure that all the vaccines show that they're effective and that they're safe. Whenever these clinical trials are ongoing for a new vaccine, it is mandatory that the known and potential benefits must outweigh the known and potential risks of the vaccine. And also, in the case of COVID-19 vaccine, no shortcuts were taken whatsoever. Every step that would have normally been achieved or taken place with normal vaccine production was also taking place in the COVID-19 vaccine. There were no shortcuts. So, the first two vaccines and now the Johnson and Johnson, so a total of three, have all been authorized under the emergency use authorization. This is why the vaccine came about so abruptly. And basically, what this means, it's issued by the government, the FDA specifically, in certain public health emergencies. Um, during this, during a pandemic such as the one that we're facing, the government can authorize the rapid development of a drug, a diagnostic test, or a medical device that's going to be used to treat, diagnose, or prevent a disease. Usually, in these very special circumstances, there are no adequate or available alternatives. So it becomes a race against time to save as many lives as possible. Oftentimes, the emergency is severe enough that we just can't wait for full DEA approval, which often can take a very long time and maybe years. So instead, we quickly evaluate the options using the evidence that is available to us, and we determine that the benefits outweigh the risks, and then the medical product, in this case, a vaccine, becomes more available during the public health emergency. So, here I want to explain a little bit more about how the vaccine came about so abruptly. When you look at this graph, you can basically see that initially during clinical trials, you start with extensive animal studies, and then from there, you usually move on to human trials that can establish that the vaccine is safe and that it is effective and going to do what it's intended to do. After that, you then move on to what we call process development, which is scaling up commercial production. So you actually start to make the product. This is a risky moment at this time because you're making a product that you don't quite have approval yet, but you just want to be ready just so that when it happens, you have the product available and there's no delay. And then finally, you establish vaccine distribution and, and administration protocols, basically logistics to figure out how you're going to get it from that vial into someone's arm. And so normally this takes place in a step by step process. So animal studies first, then human safety, and then production, and then protocols for distribution. But what has happened with this COVID-19 vaccine is actually the processes overlapped and it wasn't done sequentially, excuse me. It was done kind of simultaneously so that the process could be sped up. And so this cut back on a lot of time and allowed for the vaccine to come out sooner as opposed to years. So, how do these vaccines work? Many of you may not know, but worldwide, there are actually over 12 dozen COVID-19 vaccines. There are a lot of vaccines that are being used worldwide. However, the US has only authorized three of them to fight the spread of COVID 19. The first two were authorized in December, and that's Pfizer and Moderna. And just recently, Johnson and Johnson has also received emergency use authorization. AstraZeneca is on the horizon. It's been used in Europe and a few other countries, but it's not quite approved yet here. So let's talk about mRNA vaccines. This is the first time that we've had authorization for mRNA vaccines. However, researchers have been studying them and working with these type of vaccines since 1989. But this is the first time that this technology is being used. So what happens is in coronaviruses, they all have what we call like this crown spiked protein, and it lives on the surface of the virus. And so this protein is usually what is being used to serve as a target for the vaccine. So basically, what has happened is you're using messenger RNA, and that is basically genetic material. This genetic material is kind of like a recipe that instructs you how to make a dish. It tells your cells what to do and it gives it instructions on how to make particular proteins. So, what happens is the vaccine uses mRNA, and inside or within the RNA fragment, you have these instructions to tell the cell how to make the spike protein. So, it enters the cell, it makes several copies of the spike protein that causes COVID 19. And when the body recognizes that protein on the surface of its cell, it then forms an immune response, which is made up of immune cells, so that in the future, if you are to be exposed to the actual virus, your body is ready to fight right away and able to protect you from getting sick. mRNA vaccines do not contain eggs, preservatives, or latex. They have been approved for anyone 16 and up in the Pfizer vaccine and 18 and up in the Johnson and Johnson and Moderna vaccine. In the clinical trials, they did show 95% effectiveness, and the first two, Moderna and Pfizer, used over 75,000 human subjects before they received approval. I do want to point out that achieving 95% efficacy in a clinical trial is just not going to be the same in the real world. There's a lot of variables in the real world that you cannot control in the clinical trials. And so 95%, while it's extremely high and very promising, we know in the real world we may not see that type of efficacy. However, it's a good sign and a good marker. The advantage of mRNA vaccines is that it does not alter your DNA whatsoever. It also cannot cause COVID 19 infection. There is no way biologically that you can get COVID from the vaccine. It also allows for fast production because of the type of technology that they use to make it, and it's relatively low cost. The disadvantage of using mRNA vaccines is that it's a very fragile vaccine, and this is why you've heard about the storage requirements and sub zero temperatures that are required for these vaccines. So the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, which is the latest vaccine to receive approval, actually uses a different mechanism. It is called a viral vector vaccine, and it uses more of the traditional methods that we've used for other vaccines. And so the way this one works is it actually uses another virus to enter into the cell. Usually, this virus is modified in the lab, and they choose a harmless virus like adenovirus, which is what causes the common cold, but they modify it so that you can't get sick from it. And so this virus contains a short segment of DNA with instructions on how to make that spike protein that I talked about. So you inject the vaccine into the muscle, the genetic material enters the muscle cell, and in effect, what you have is mRNA being made inside that cell, this mRNA, the recipe, then goes on to tell the cell how to make the spike protein. And once the cell makes the protein is on the outer surface of the cell. The body recognizes that it's foreign and it forms an immune response and antibodies against the spike protein. So that once again, if you were to become exposed by the true virus, your body will be ready and able to fight off this infection. One thing that I want to say again with the viral vector vaccines is that they cannot cause COVID 19. They are unable to cause it. It's just not biologically possible. And again, they do not alter your DNA in any way as well. So, the advantages of the viral vector vaccines are that it's single dose and it's easier to store. So, this is very promising for the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. A lot of people are interested in just being one and done. You know, you don't have to schedule a second appointment. You don't have to worry about second side effects both times. It's just one injection. It's just a lot easier. It really simplifies things. So, that is a great advantage. And then also, it's easier to store, doesn't require the sub-zero freezing temperatures. So, especially in rural areas and smaller, maybe medical clinics who just don't have the capacity to freeze the other vaccines, this will be something that they will be able to handle and will be able to distribute in the community. The disadvantage of the viral vector vaccine, such as the Johnson and Johnson, is that it was less effective in the clinical trials, while the other one cited closer to 95%. Johnson and Johnson was only about 75% effective. However, when it came to preventing death, it was just as effective as the other two. So 75 might sound a little bit lower, but overall, that's actually still pretty good. So let's talk about side effects because this is huge for a lot of people. Um, to date, there has been over 109 million doses administered in the United States since December. And so well, not we, the government, the CDC has been tracking all side effects that have been reported. And the most common by far is local side effects at the injection site. So it is very common, up to about 80 to 90% of people will report that they get redness, pain, or even swelling at the injection site. And I myself did experience that with both injections, and it did last a couple of days. The second time, I think it lasted almost a week, but I was still very functional and it wasn't anything that was debilitating. Another 50 to 80% of people will report that they feel like they have a headache, they have chills, fever, muscle pain, nausea, and tiredness. So almost kind of like flu-like symptoms. Less common are vomiting and diarrhea and abdominal pain, but some people report that as well. The good thing is most of these symptoms are mild, don't require any hospitalization. Most people don't have to miss work. Oftentimes, they occur the first or second day that you receive the vaccine, but in the clinical trials, some people did report symptoms up to 7 days after receiving the vaccine. And they're usually self limited, meaning that they resolve very quickly. Usually within like 48 hours, you feel completely fine. The side effects are usually a little bit worse after the second dose and more common after the second dose. So if you didn't feel anything after the first, then you might expect to feel something after the second dose. And then people are worried about the serious side effects, right? Those are the mild ones. So there have been some severe allergic reactions that have been reported with all of the vaccines, and the rate is about 5 people for every million who are vaccinated will have a severe allergic reaction. So this is why it is important to know if you've had serious allergic reactions to prior vaccines, if you've had severe allergic reactions to other medications, and to kind of take that into consideration. But it is still considered very rare. Again, the rate has been 5 in every million. Other serious reactions have also occurred, but they have been medically manageable, meaning that the person did recover from the reaction, and that rate is about 40 people per 1 million will suffer another serious reaction that was medically manageable. Um, of course, the CDC is tracking deaths that have been reported after anyone has received a vaccine. If they pass away, the CDC is investigating autopsies and getting all the data that's required to determine the cause of death. And so there's been about 1,400 people who have received the COVID-19 vaccines who went on to pass away. That's over 100. That's compared to 109 million people who have been vaccinated. And in those circumstances, the research and the data do not point to evidence that states that the person died because of effects of the vaccine, and it seems to be unlinked and unrelated. So, just a few important points to keep in mind. You should not receive another vaccine within 2 weeks of getting your COVID-19 vaccine, and also for 2 weeks after. So, don't get your flu shot before or right after your vaccine. Wait 2 weeks before and after before getting any other vaccine. And it is recommended to still get the flu vaccine this year as well. You will need to be monitored for at least 15 to 30 minutes, so keep that in mind. They want to just make sure that you feel okay and that you don't suffer any allergic reactions. You must schedule your second dose either 21 days for the Pfizer vaccine or 28 days later for the Moderna vaccine. And it is important to get both vaccines. There was some talk about people questioning whether it was absolutely necessary to get both, but the studies, the clinical trials were only effective after 2 doses. They didn't really study what would happen after one dose. And so you don't know how much immunity you'd really be getting if you only got one dose. So it's definitely not recommended. It does take 2 weeks after your last injection for the body to build immunity. So just because you've gotten your first vaccine does not mean that you have full protection. It takes about 2 weeks. And of course, everyone is a little bit different, but that's what the experts are saying. And then also, if you have had COVID-19, you do not need to wait 90 days to receive the vaccine. Initially, the guidelines were saying to wait 90 days because you probably have some natural immunity after having the actual infection. But now those guidelines have changed now that the vaccine has become more available, and they're saying you don't have to wait the full 90 days. So what are we still learning? There's still a lot of unknowns out there. The vaccines obviously are meant to protect you from getting sick, but it may still be possible to infect others. So this is kind of a game changer. Um, and this is why it's becoming so important to reach herd immunity through many people getting vaccinated, because even though I may be vaccinated, I can still come in contact with the COVID virus and have a viral burden and shedding in my mouth and in my nose. And if someone is in close contact with me, even though I feel fine and I'm protected and I won't get sick, I can still potentially pass it on to someone else. So it is very important as we continue to study. The vaccine and know exactly how infectious we can still be after getting the vaccine, that we keep these things in mind, that we still can spread it to others. Duration of protection. A lot of people are asking, well, how long does the protection last? We really don't know right now. And a lot of that has to do with the mutations that are occurring. Um, Coronavirus is an RNA virus, and RNA viruses mutate. This is what they do. This virus has been mutating since the pandemic started, but only recently have the mutations become a little bit more concerning and significant. And that's only because the DNA has changed so much that it is allowing the virus to become a little bit more transmissible. It can cause more severe illness in some cases. It may become less vulnerable to the vaccines. And also, it may be less susceptible to the current treatments and medications that we have for COVID. So, the more new strains that we get, the more likely the duration of protection from the vaccine may not be as long as we want it to. But right now, there's no definite answer about how long our protection will last. As more people get the vaccine and we continue to monitor the effects of the vaccine, we'll have a better idea about that. And then, as I sort of mentioned, the vaccine protection against the variants. So, with these variants that are out there right now, again, the data is still not conclusive, but it does seem that being vaccinated does protect against the variants. What we do believe, though, is that the protection is not as high as the original strain of coronavirus that was studied in the clinical trials, but there is some protection still. We don't know much about pediatrics. There are ongoing clinical trials right now for the pediatric population, and we're thinking that maybe by the fall there will be vaccine approval for younger kids. It may be as young as 5, I believe, is what they're studying right now. But for now, unless you're 16 and up, you are not able to get the vaccine because we haven't studied the effects well enough. And I just want to comment, even though we know that younger kids are not likely to get really sick from COVID, obviously they are still getting COVID and they are still spreading it to others. And a few of them have suffered from serious illness and required hospitalization. The effects in pregnancy and breastfeeding. Um, this is going to be something that will need to be a one on one conversation between the woman and her medical provider. They did not include any pregnant females in the clinical trials for these vaccines. However, a few of the women did go on to become pregnant during the study. And so, right now, there's no data to suggest that the vaccine is harmful for pregnant women. However, enough data is not available at this time. And so, again, it's going to have to be a conversation between that female discussing her risks and the benefits with her medical provider. How long does natural immunity last? So, natural immunity refers to someone who has had COVID 19 and whose body has naturally formed antibodies against COVID 19. So, that person will be protected for some time as well. But that protection varies from person to person. It depends on how robust that immune response was for that individual. And that's just going to vary from person to person. We have seen repeat cases of COVID 19 where people have been infected for a second time. So we definitely know it can happen. And so right now we're thinking that that natural immunity may last for up to 3 months, maybe a little longer, but no one really knows the answer to that. And then what are the long-term effects of COVID-19? That's something that we're still learning as well. 10 to 30% of people who have had COVID-19 continue to suffer from what we call chronic symptoms, meaning that they just have lagging residual symptoms that just won't go away, even though they had the infection maybe months ago. And so it definitely is out there that people even though you recover from the illness, you can have lagging effects. This tends to be more common in older populations who are 65 and up, and also people who had more serious illness. And then finally, what are the long term effects of the vaccine? We're still learning that as well. As the more people get vaccinated and the more data is collected, we'll learn about long term effects of the vaccine. However, historically, it has been said that after 6 weeks of receiving any vaccine, it's very, very rare and uncommon to still have any new effects that occur after 6 weeks. So we're pretty confident at this time that there are probably not going to be any long term lingering effects from the vaccine based on historical data, but we're continuing to study that as well. So there are some new CDC guidelines that I want to go over for people who have been vaccinated. So things are relaxing just a little bit. And the CDC actually now says that you can gather indoors with other vaccinated individuals without a mask. They're also saying that you can gather indoors with unvaccinated people from one single household without a mask. So this is if you're going to maybe visit a family member and just have one single household there, not people visiting from other households as well. You can safely visit that person without a mask, unless the people you're going to visit in that household is a high risk or vulnerable individual. If they have comorbidities or if they're older, then they do not recommend going without a mask. Also, if you're vaccinated, you do not have to quarantine after exposure to COVID. So before they were saying any exposure, you have to quarantine, and now you don't if you're vaccinated. The exception to this is if you live in a group setting where spread occurs more rapidly and easily. And so, in those circumstances where it's harder to also socially distance, like in a shelter or a group home, if you are exposed, they do ask that everyone continue to quarantine in that circumstance. However, there are things that still have not changed for those who are vaccinated. They still want us to delay our travel for essential travel only. They also want to tell those who have been vaccinated to avoid medium and large gatherings. We still shouldn't be gathering in groups. We should still take precautions in public, and we do need to continue to monitor ourselves for symptoms. So, if you do get those typical symptoms of COVID-19, it's very important that you go get tested and quarantine. So, for those who are interested in scheduling the vaccine, this has been a phased approach that is being regulated by the CDC and the Chicago Department of Public Health. Phase one, which started December 15th, included frontline healthcare workers, non hospital healthcare workers, congregate facilities, and long term care facilities such as prisons and nursing homes. Then phase 1B started January 25th, which included frontline essential workers, people who were still working and weren't able to work from home, such as grocery workers and postal workers, and anyone who was age 65 and up. And then February 25th began the next phase in which people who are less than age 65 are also able to be vaccinated if they have comorbidities and chronic medical conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, asthma, COPD, obesity, and a couple others, kidney failure. At this time, all vaccinations are by appointment only, and this is mostly because of the storage requirements. They need to make sure that they're thawing enough vaccine and that they don't go to waste. So they have to keep tabs on who's going to be coming in that day and how many vaccines are going to be administered. When you do go and get your vaccine, make sure to bring your ID and your insurance card. Um, Insurance is not required, but if you do have insurance, they want you to bring their card so that it can be billed to your insurance, who will pay for it. And if you're interested, you can go to coronavirus.illinois.gov to learn more about scheduling the vaccine in Illinois. So, in summary, the vaccine for COVID-19 has been safe. It is effective, but it's definitely not foolproof. It is free, regardless of insurance status or immigration status. You cannot get COVID-19 from the vaccine. The side effects are mild and are a natural response that actually show that the body's immune system is responding to the virus. The vaccination is okay if you have already had COVID-19 illness, you can still become vaccinated. The vaccination is a powerful weapon against serious illness, hospitalization, and death. And as I said before, and I want to emphasize again, you can still get COVID if you receive the vaccine. So, when can we go back to normal? Well, we're far, far, far from that. Hopefully, in a year from now, things will look a lot different. But we can't let our guards down just yet. It's crucial that we continue to social distance, avoid gatherings and poorly ventilated areas. Continue to wear our masks and wash our hands frequently. So keep in mind, the goal of vaccination is not eradication, right? So we're not going to get rid of COVID anytime soon. That can be years down the line. We already know that, for one, not everyone is going to get vaccinated, and two, even those that do get vaccinated um, can still get COVID. So there will be breakthrough infections, and there already have been breakthrough infections. Those are the people who become vaccinated and still ended up getting COVID after vaccination. Keep in mind that vaccine is not immunity. It just offers a better chance of protection. So the way I like to look at it, and the analogy I like to use, is think of the vaccine as an umbrella, right? So depending on the environment and the circumstances outside, in a light shower situation where it's just raining lightly, the umbrella is going to offer you pretty good protection, right? However, if you're out in a hurricane and you have an umbrella, it's very likely you're still going to get wet. So if vaccinated people are hanging out and congregating with a lot of people who are unvaccinated, they're going to catch the infection. So it depends on your behavior and how you're mitigating your risks and the precautions that you're taking. And then the vaccine is also best paired with other preventive measures that we've already been doing, right? Such as wearing your mask and social distancing. The same with in a storm, if you have your umbrella, you wear your raincoat and your rain boots, it is very less likely that you're going to get wet in that storm. So I hope that this discussion was useful to you, and I hope that you took away a few points that you can share with others. And I hope it clarified any misconceptions that have been out there. And I have put up a few sites that you can refer to if you want more information. And with that said, I would like to take a few questions. Um, let's see if there's any here that I can see. I know that one question that was submitted before was regards to why there are so many vaccines. Why don't we just have one vaccine? And the reason for that is at the beginning, when the clinical trials were taking place, we didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket, right? We had no idea if a trial was going to end in 2 months because of bad outcomes and adverse side effects. So you wanted as many companies as possible to kind of get started and have a product available so that we can end up with at least one option, if not more. And luckily, we were able to end up with several options. And remember, they have not received full FDA approval yet. So even though there's several under the EUA, we don't know how many of these vaccines are going to end up with full FDA approval. That's going to be determined by the ongoing research that is occurring as more and more people get vaccinated. But the basic idea was that you didn't want to put all your eggs in one basket, and that we wanted as many vaccines available as possible to be available for the public. Um, let's see, are there any other questions? I think there were. Let me just look and see. Oh, someone asked a question saying, why are they administering two vaccines that are not FDA approved? And I think I did answer that already in the presentation where I talked about, even though they're not FDA approved, they have been approved by the government for emergency use authorization because they were able to demonstrate that the known and potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risks. Another question was, will I need a booster shot every year if I decide to get the vaccine? And this, again, is going to be determined by ongoing research and also determined by the mutations. So, if many mutations occur, then yes, we probably will need to change the vaccine or administer booster shots. But right now, we don't know how often that's going to be. But yes, it is likely we will need repeat vaccines and maybe booster shots. Um, and I think I answered everything else. Oh, let's see. I see one. Is there any truth to the vaccine that will help lessen the severity of someone that is currently hospitalized with severe COVID? So that's a good question. Um, I don't think that that is going to help. I haven't read a lot of research on if someone currently is in the hospital and sick with COVID, will giving them the vaccine serve as a treatment and help them heal sooner? Probably not, because their natural response is already taking place in the body to build immunity towards, build antibodies to fight the active infection that's going on. And so by administering that vaccine, while you will trigger an immune response, it's going to be delayed. Again, remember, with this vaccine, it's one shot, and then 4 weeks later, you get another shot, and then you wait 2 weeks, and then you have some immunity. So the process is going to take weeks before the vaccine will be able to help them. And by then, the infection will have already run its course. So I don't think getting the vaccine while you're already sick will be helpful. How does the vaccine affect women and mammograms? So, in all of the clinical trials, they studied about 50% women, 50% men, so it was pretty equal. And so the effective rates that I cited, about 90 to 95% for Pfizer and Moderna, were both for men and women. And for Johnson and Johnson, the efficacy was about 70%, and that was also both for men and women. Let's see. Think there might have been one or two more that went across the screen that I didn't get to read. I'm not sure. I'll wait a few minutes and see if anything else pops up. Okay. I hope that everyone found this informative and that you feel more comfortable making a decision for yourself about what you want to do for yourself and your family. And I hope that you continue to do your own research and reach out to your own trusted messengers, people in the medical field, people in the sciences, and other leaders who can help you make a good informed decision. But don't rely on what you see on social media and on the internet necessarily, because there's just a lot of bad information that's being distributed, and it can have really bad effects, obviously, on society if people are kind of following that information. So continue to do your research, continue to be safe, and be very cautious. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening. Oh, there's a question here. Okay, why are people scared to get vaccinated? Doesn't all medication come with side effects? Yeah, so that's a good question. All medications, anything we put into our body, not even medications, but there's a lot of other things we put into our body in foods that are also bad for us or could potentially be bad for us or have side effects. Many people are on medication and those have side effects. Um, you're always taking a risk with anything that is not necessarily natural. But yeah, I kind of went over some of the reasons people have been hesitant, and I think a lot of it just is mistrust, and just the bad information that they're seeing out there, and the things that they're hearing that are not necessarily true, and so it's instilling a little bit of fear. And again, with how fast the vaccine was developed, some people have some hesitancy about that, and I hope I clarified that a little bit as well. But hopefully, the more people that come out and have conversations about the vaccine and get more truths out there, people will understand that it's actually very effective, it's actually very safe, and that they will believe in the science behind it and believe in those that are recommending it. Ultimately, what we have to kind of decide is, do we want to take our chances with COVID, or do we want to take our chances with the vaccine? It's kind of what it comes down to. We already know what COVID does or what it can do. And we have a pretty good idea of what the vaccine is able to do and what type of protection it can offer as well. So it's just the choice that we have to make. All right. So if there's any more questions, I can answer them offline. The program is officially over now. And again, everyone have a really good evening and be safe.